Hello everybody, my name is Happy and I'd like to welcome you to my history reaction channel. Today we'll be looking at 15 minutes of history facts you never need to know. I don't know that there's any facts you'll never need to know. There's a lot of facts that are highly unlikely you'll ever need to know, but you never know when you're going to be on Jeopardy and be asked one of these, right? Could be a big windfall for you. Anyway, this is Chat History. I've only recently started watching a couple of his videos, so it's a new channel to me, but I like what I've seen of his work. So I thought I'd look through his catalog and pick a few things to start out with, preferably items I haven't seen, although I'm not above rewatching things with you guys and expanding on what he's saying. In this case, it is a first-time view, and I'm looking forward to it because I actually love trivia. I love little details that really aren't meaningful in the big picture or in the larger scheme of things, but are just fun to know. So let's just go ahead and get into this. As always, I'll put a link to the original comment down in the description below. Please consider supporting Chat History if you like what he does here. We do want to encourage our original content creators. With that said, let's see what he's got for us.
15 minutes of useless history. Wait, what? Poland had a bear soldier that
yes, they did. Woljak, something like that.
His name was Voytek, and he was a good boy. In 1386, France executed a pig that killed a child.
That's hardly the only time an animal's been executed. I know they've executed an elephant as well. Yeah, interesting stuff.
It was arrested, faced trial, and was hanged. Poor thing.
Yep.
During the Great Depression, people would often resort to using potato sacks as clothes.
Yeah.
Ancient Mayans.
That did happen. I know for a fact my grandmother's family did do that because she told me so. Also, in her case, they would do things like, even as a child in grade school, they would buy adult men's socks for her. They would go all the way up past her knees. And the reason they did that was so that when they started getting holes worn in them, you could just pull it down a little bit, cut off the damaged part, once it was beyond just regular sewing anyway, re-sew the toe, and you keep using the same sock over and over and over again forever. And she said she was so embarrassed because her socks were never the same length because of that. And it was a humiliation for her. But yeah, potato sacks were used. In fact, I'm not going to say it was widely used, but it was used enough that not only were printed that showed how to make good clothing out of these sacks, but some of the sack companies themselves started printing patterns on these sacks, make them more appealing as clothing, to encourage customers to buy their bags and their potatoes over some of the things other people were selling. America, gotta love capitalism, even during the Great Depression. But yeah, this is a real thing. I don't know how, like I said, I don't know how widespread it was, but I know for a fact it happened. I know people like my grandparents, my grandmother specifically, that had clothes that was made out of gunny sacks.
Worshipped turkeys, as they were seen as vessels for the gods. The 69th and 420th words of the Declaration of Independence are to and districts.
He just did that to be able to use numbers like 69. That is useless.
The Ford Motor Company was founded in 1903 and hasn't produced a good car since. It's said that in Ohio
Ford Motor Company did not invent cars. Ford did not invent the car. Benz did. What Ford did was make them much cheaper and easier to produce, so that they were much more affordable and more widely available, so people could start having cars at home. Before that, it was more of a luxury item. Now, a lot of people, it was much more widely available.
1895, only
Ohio.
2 cars existed across the entire cursed
and
state.
They wrecked into each other.
They crashed into each other.
Yep.
Famous scientist Albert.
I don't know that they were the only two, but yeah, they were certainly the only two in the area, I'm sure. They managed to hit each other anyway.
Albert Einstein was once offered the presidency of Israel.
Yep.
He turned it down. The British Empire had around 120 colonies at its height in the 20th century.
Right.
Robert Lincoln, son of...
Not necessarily just colonies, though. Some of those were more possessions and colonies. And what I mean by that is, like, you take India. It's not like the British were going over there and colonizing India. They just took over the country. And then you have Commonwealth and other things. So I don't know if colony is quite the right word to use for that, but the idea is correct. Robert Lincoln, I know where we're going with this. A couple of things. First, he was rescued from falling off a train track in front of a train by none other than Edwin Booth, the older brother of John Wilkes Booth, the man who will murder his father. And speaking of the murder of his father, Robert Lincoln would have been in the area when his father was murdered. He was also he was a direct eyewitness to the assassination of President Garfield, and he was in the same World Fair where McKinley was assassinated. So after that, he swore off being around presidents because he basically, when he was around one, they died. They were assassinated. The final time he was ever in close proximity to a president was when he went to the dedication of the Lincoln Memorial, and Harding died shortly after of natural causes. By shortly after, I think it was like a year later, but I'm sure Robert probably blamed himself for that too. Anyway, let's see what he got to say.
Of U.S. President Abraham Lincoln was present or nearby during three different presidential assassinations. He was just a few blocks away from the Ford Theater when Papa Abraham caught a bullet in the back of his skull. He was an eyewitness to President Garfield's assassination and also experienced President McKinley getting absolutely cannoned in the chest. Afterward, little Bobby Lincoln refused any future invites.
He looks a lot more like his mother than his father. I can absolutely see Mary Todd in that face.
The presidential events. William Higginbotham, a physicist who worked on the atomic bomb, invented the first video game in 1958 using an oscilloscope. He called his creation Tennis for Two. It was a precursor to Pong. About 4%.
We had a Pong console when I was a kid. And yeah, it was literally a console just for the one game. You had a couple paddles and a console. And that was my introduction to video games. So yeah, Pong was great. Very simplistic, but it was still fun.
Of the Normandy beaches are made up of leftover shrapnel from the D-Day invasions of World War II.
That's true. Also, if you go up on the cliffs above the beaches, you can see shell craters from the shelling. So there's a lot of evidence still there of D-Day.
The first European settlement in present-day Uruguay was formed in 1527. It was called San Lazaro and was, you guessed it, a Spanish settlement.
Right.
Ancient Roman warships were equipped with huge fucking
Greek fire
flamethrowers that were used in naval warfare. They called it Greek fire, and boy was it effective. In the year 1204, Valdemar II of Denmark was recognized as king in Norway.
Right.
Ketchup used to be sold as medicine in the 1830s.
Ketchup has an interesting history. The word ketchup comes from an Asian word, and I'm not sure from which country or which language. I know it comes from an Asian word for a fish sauce. Ketchup as we know it, or close to as we know it, actually originated as a medicine made of mushrooms, not of tomatoes. Tomato ketchup comes later.
George Washington died on December 14, 1799 at the age of 67. His last words were, "'Tis well."
Yeah, he should not have died then, most likely. Good chance his doctors killed him. Washington was trying to retire for years and years and kept getting pulled back into public service. He finally gets retired and died like a year or two later. And got sick. His doctor tried to balance the humors, which is what they did in these days. And what that meant was you have bodily fluids, you have different kinds of bile, and you're supposed to try to balance all this. So you would do things like leeching, which I believe they did with Washington. They drained a lot of his blood. They would do things like inducing vomiting to try to balance the humors. And if that didn't kill him, it certainly hastened his death. But he might very well have recovered and enjoyed another 10, 20 years like a lot of the other founding fathers did if he hadn't been treated for being sick.
In ancient Greece, skirts were considered manly and pants were for women. Nothing like letting the boys breathe, you know?
The record for the world's longest stare was set in 2011 in Australia. The loving glare lasted 41 minutes straight and 0 minutes gay.
That was disturbing. When he first did that, I'm like...
French monarch King Charles VI suffered from a psychological disorder called
the glass delusion. Yeah, he thought he would shatter. I've heard of this.
Glass delusion, where he was thoroughly convinced that his entire being was made out of glass, and thus likely to shatter into pieces at the slightest poke.
No touchy.
He wore clothes enforced with iron rods and prevented anyone from touching him. In 1633, the Shanxi province in Imperial China was ground zero to the Great Plague in the late Ming Dynasty.
Okay.
More than half of the population got sick that year, and over 90% of the province's population was dead 9 years later.
Okay, that's interesting. I haven't heard of that one, and that's kind of my cup of tea is natural disasters. whether it be famine, which is often also man-made, but I tend to categorize it as natural disaster anyway, disease, volcanoes, earthquakes, floods, that kind of thing. That's the area I focus on. I haven't heard of this one. I'll have to look into it.
The Roman Colosseum used to be covered in marble, but
Yeah?
after Rome fell, the marble was looted by big-titty goth pillagers.
Yeah, and the Colosseum is actually the Flavian amphitheater. It was called the Colosseum because there was a colossus located near it originally. I believe it was either, I think it was of Nero, but it might not have been, but it was built during the time of Nero, at the very least. I had 3 years of Latin in high school, and I was in Latin club. Dark times, I tell you. Latin killed the Romans, that is plain to see. Latin is a dead language, that is plain to see. First it killed the Romans, now it's killing me. A Latin club motto.
Mariana Trench was first discovered in 1875. It is measured at about 36,000 feet or 11,000 meters deep at its lowest point.
Right.
Dr. John Kellogg, creator of the famous cereal brand, invented cornflakes and graham crackers to prevent his patients from gooning.
Yeah, Kellogg is quite the character. Not one of my favorites. So Kellogg, for starters, he was a big believer in grain food, which is why he comes up with things like graham crackers and cornflakes. He thinks that we need more grains in our diet. He is convinced that spicy foods, for example, lead people to masturbate, and that eating plain bland foods like whole grain products is not only healthier, but it will reduce sins such as masturbation. He was also a notorious eugenicist who wanted selective breeding and all that stuff. He's really not a pleasant guy. But I can't deny I like some Kellogg's products. So you can like this stuff and hate the guy who's behind it, or dislike the guy.
Ancient African city of Timbuktu was founded in the 5th century.
Mali.
It served as a popular trade route for salt, gold, and people begrudgingly forced to work for free.
Yeah, so I mentioned this in the very first video I did for this channel, which was Bill Wurtz's History of the Entire World, I guess. And I mentioned there that we tend to underestimate just how influential some of these sub-Saharan African civilizations were. We don't tend to do that so much for the northern African civilizations like Morocco or Egypt. We accept that they were advanced civilizations. We don't really think that much about what's below the Sahara, however. But Timbuktu is a great example of a great city, very influential. When this was part of Mali, King of Mali, Mansa Musa, as I mentioned in that video, I can never say his name right for some bizarre reason because it's not that complicated. He was the richest man in the world, ever, as far as we know, adjusted for inflation. But don't underestimate Africa. It had great civilizations down there. It had great trading centers. It had wealthy nations.
During the 18th century in England, carrying around a pineapple was a telltale sign that you were rich as hell.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
gonna hate, bruh. The chainsaw was invented by medical doctors
This one is disturbing, but yeah, I've heard of this one before.
as a tool for symphysiotomy, a procedure for aiding in childbirth. There's an ancient text called
Voynier manuscript, I believe what it's called. I recognize it right away. Got all these drawings of strange, well, some known plants and herbs, but some strange ones as well. It's written in a language that to this day nobody has deciphered, even if assuming it is decipherable and not just gibberish. Really, really interesting manuscript. I would love to get a copy of it someday for my own entertainment, not just to look at through it, but to try to figure out what it says.
called the Voynich manuscript.
Voynich, not
handwritten in
Voynier,
an unknown
Voynich.
language that has never been
Got it.
deciphered. Wait, what's that say? Oh, would you look at that?
Yeah, I
Famous
agree with
silly
him.
named astronomer Galileo Galilei discovered the planet of Jupiter
Yes, he
using a
did.
handheld telescope in 1610.
Not just that, but he discovered that Jupiter had moons, which got him in a huge amount of trouble with the church. Because church doctrine at the time held that the earth was the center of the universe and everything circles the earth. And Galileo's looking at Jupiter and he's saying it has moons that are circling it. Well, that breaks. It's blasphemy. It destroys the perfection of God's universe as perceived by the church at the time. So they put him under house arrest for the rest of his life. for daring to believe that other planets could have moons circling them, because that doesn't fit their nice, neat narrative.
So you know how the U.S. government banned alcohol during the Prohibition in the 1920s and 1930s?
Oh, yeah.
Well, people still wanted to get absolutely slizzard.
Absolutely,
so they
they
resorted
did.
to stealing and drinking industrial alcohol. You know, like rubbing alcohol used to treat wounds.
Which you can't do. It's deadly, especially at this time, because they put additives in it to prevent you from doing this, as in deadly additives.
Yeah, you're not supposed to drink that stuff because
Right.
industrial alcohol is commonly denatured, meaning that toxic additives like kerosene or acetone are mixed in to prevent people from drinking it. What's fun is that this didn't really stop anyone from power chugging the stuff, so
It
they
didn't.
could feel all wavy and wiggly. The mass consumption resulted in the deaths of around 10,000 Americans.
Yep.
The most successful pirate in history was a woman. Qing Shi was
Yep.
the commander of the Chinese Red Flag Fleet, which consisted of over 300 warships and about 80,000 crew.
There have been a lot of very successful female pirates. You have Anne Bonny, you got this one, you got Grace O'Malley in Ireland. There were a lot of very successful and influential female pirates.
Move over, Blackbeard. About 90% of the world's fresh water is frozen in Antarctica's ice shelves.
Yep.
Humanity's been trying to melt it out of there for ages. In 1998, over 1,200 human bones were found in Benjamin Franklin's house. They were used to study human anatomy.
That's what we think anyway. We don't know 100% for sure. That or he was a very prolific serial killer. I think this is by far and away a more likely explanation. And it's very likely that most of them were stolen by grave robbers for him. Whether he knew that or not, I wouldn't swear to, although being Franklin, I would say there's better than even odds he did know. Franklin is easily one of the most interesting characters in the Founding Fathers. He was quite the character. In addition to this, he also was famous as a womanizer, especially during his time in France. He even wrote a book on how young men can seduce older widows, or women, not widows, married women, on the principle that women are much better than inexperienced women. Yeah, he was a member of the Hellfire Club briefly. Franklin was interesting. I'll just put it that way. He was interesting.
Or so they say. Pablo Picasso's first painting was called El Picador, which he created at just 8 years old. It sucked.
Way better than I could do.
I wrote most of this script on February 29th, 2024. Happy leap year. Pope Gregory IX declared war on cats. Roman Emperor Caligula declared war on the sea. Athletes.
He did do that, and famously when, he literally had his army attack the ocean. They fired arrows into the sea, they threw spears into it, they stabbed it a few times, and then he allowed them to collect the spoils of the battle, which would be seashells. So I'm sure his man had a great time.
in the ancient Olympics competed completely naked to show off the guns
Why wouldn't
and show
they?
off the buns. The word robot comes from the Czech word robota, meaning forced labor.
Right. Yeah, because even in Russian, работаю is work, labor. So that's not surprising.
The year 536 is commonly referred to as the worst year in history to be alive. A volcanic eruption in Europe farted out enough dust and debris to cause a multi-year winter. The lack of sunlight dropped average global temperatures by several degrees, causing crop failure and famine in Europe and Asia. Oh yeah, and then the plague showed up. Napoleon...
Yeah, and that's not uncommon. That's happened several times throughout history. Again, in History of the Entire World, I guess, by Bill Wirtz, I did mention the supervolcanoes at the Permian extinction, and I kind of went into how some of these other volcanic eruptions like this one have short-term effects that can cause global cooling and potentially global warming for a year or two or three, but the Earth will recover because it's a one-and-done type event. Where we run into trouble is when we have these things going off rapidly enough that the Earth's never allowed to recover, and that's where you get the Permian extinctions, which wipe off 99% of all the life on Earth due to a whole massive eruption going on in Siberia, in a region called the Siberian Traps. If you're interested about that, check out the part 1 of History of the Entire World, I guess, my reaction to that. Interesting stuff.
Iceland's horse was named Marengo.
I did not know
Established in
that.
the year 930, Iceland has the oldest parliament in the world.
And apparently dragons, which is far more interesting. I do know they have elves. They even have a university where you can get an elf hunting degree. I need to go to Iceland.
The 13th Grand Duke of Lithuania was Jogaila Algirdaitis. He was also King of Poland.
Okay.
According to a 2021...
Yeah, that's Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. They were united under a single ruler for a while. Yeah, so I knew that.
One census, 55% of Isle
I just didn't know who the ruler was.
of Man residents identify as Christian. 44% aren't religious at all. Abraham Lincoln was a licensed
interesting.
bartender.
Yeah, he was. Also a champion wrestler.
Of the ancient city of Assyria was Ashur.
Yes, but do you know the airspeed velocity of an African swallow? That has got to be a Monty Python reference. If you haven't seen Monty Python on the Holy Grail, one of the questions they're asked when they're crossing the bridge is what's the capital of Assyria? And the knight doesn't know. It's Ashur.
Now you can get across the Bridge of Death.
What?
Yep.
Is the capital of Assyria?
Ashur.
Right, off you go.
The very first known written language is Sumerian, with the earliest known usage
I love that show. I like most of what Monty Python does. Some of it's hit and miss, but I like most of it. But Holy Grail.
dating back to 3100 BC in Mesopotamia. The German MG-42 machine gun used in World War II has a firing rate of up to 1,500 rounds per minute with an effective range of up to 2,000 meters.
Now, it can't fire all those continuously. The barrel will overheat pretty fast. They have to fire in bursts.
In the Roman Empire, a triumvir monetalis was someone who minted coins.
Yep.
The Great Fire of London in 1666 started in a small bakery and quickly engulfed the majority of the city for 4 days. Firefighting methods
Yeah, if you got that many wooden buildings packed that tightly, it's hard to stop the spread.
at the time were no more than buckets of water or destroying other buildings to stop the spread. In the end, 85% of the city's residents were now homeless. On the bright side, only 6 people reportedly died, so there's a spark of positivity.
I find that really hard to believe. I mean, it's possible, but I suspect the numbers were probably higher. This was a period where they probably weren't tracking the lower class as well as they probably should have been. I could be wrong about that. This is hardly my area of expertise, but I would be shocked if the actual number of dead wasn't higher than that.
The Ottoman Empire was founded in 1299 and fell in 1922. At the end of World War II, Russian citizens decided to party hard. So hard, in fact, that the entire country's vodka reserves were tapped out in just 22 hours.
That is not surprising. The Soviet Union was decimated by World War II. They took more casualties than any other country. In fact, I think they took almost as many as all the other countries combined. Maybe not, but if not, it's just because Germany also took a lot. But Russia, by far and away, was the hardest hit. I'm not surprised they partied hard and got sloshed after all that.
Nostrovia. In 1973, Chinese Supreme Communist overlord Mao Zedong offered the United States 10 million Chinese women. As a joke. Instead, he ended up killing 40 to 80 million people during his totalitarian dictatorship.
Yeah, the Great Leap Forward. Extensive famine, and that's not unusual. The same thing happened in the first of Stalin's 5-year plans when they tried to collectivize food production. That led to all sorts of problems. Even before Stalin, even in Lenin's time, it ran into problems. For example, you collectivize all this grain, you hoard it all, you're not distributing it fast enough to replant for the next harvest. Is one problem. Distributing becomes an issue and a concern if you're not set up for it already. And in the case of China specifically, you also have the problem that they were so concerned about birds messing with the crops that they put a bounty on pigeons. And pigeons were nearly driven to extinction in China. The problem being is the pigeons are the only thing that's keeping the insects under control. So by trying to fix one crop problem, they created one that was far, far worse. They got overrun by insects.
It was supposed to be a great leap forward, Mao.
Yeah.
A popular fad in the 1950s was phone booth stuffing, and...
Yes, that was. No, thank you. I like my fellow man, but not that much.
just like my romantic endeavors, it didn't last long.
That looked like a game of Twister that went horribly, horribly wrong.
Julius Caesar was stabbed 23 times.
Not all by the same guy. Ow.
Rich people in 19th century Europe were in harsh competition for who could collect the most unique and rare orchids. Too
Yes.
bad none of them pulled a Black Lotus.
They did do that.
Alexander the Great named over 20 cities after himself during his conquering of over 2
lot of
million square
Alexandrias.
miles of land by age 30. What have you done with your life?
Not that.
In 1953, U.S. President Dwight Dimmadome Eisenhower was lassoed by cowboy Marty Montana on horseback during his inauguration speech. Nintendo was founded in 1889 by Fusajiro
Card manufacturer.
Yamauchi to produce Hanafuda playing cards. Famed philosopher Socrates didn't really like written words. He believed
Right.
it was an inefficient way to communicate knowledge and that it would make people lazy and ruin their ability to use the power of memory to recall information. Thus, people would rely on text to retrieve information instead of fully understanding concepts. As a result, the stubborn asshole never wrote anything down. J.R.R. Tolkien's full name was
John Ronald Reuel Tolkien.
John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. You read the Harry Potter books, right? The
No.
Laotian Civil War lasted 16 years, 6 months, 1 week, and 2 days.
Good.
Despite how old you think it was, the Aztec Empire was actually founded in 1428.
Yeah, not that old at all.
King Henry VIII had
Yeah, it was fairly new when the conquistadors, Cortez, arrived. Now, with that said, it arose out of things that were there before, but that particular incarnation of the civilization was new.
4 butt-wiping servants called Grooms of the Stool. For their services,
Yeah, that was a job, and it was a highly sought-after, prestigious job.
all 4 were formally knighted. At the start
Yep.
of World War I, the U.S. Air Force had only 18 pilots and 12 airplanes.
Yeah, air power was not significant in World War I. It was there, but it was in its infancy. Remember, this is not that long after the Wright brothers. There were examples. A good example would be just flying over to scout out enemy terrain, and that was more used later in the war than it was early on.
In ancient Asia, death by elephant was a popular execution method.
One way to do
Germany
it.
controlled 4 colonies during the scramble for Africa in the 1800s and 1900s. They included territories in modern-day Burundi,
Right.
Cameroon, Namibia, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Togo. On average, Germany uncovers about 2,000 tons of unexploded bombs every year.
Yeah, this is not unusual. You find bombs and landmines all through Europe in the major battle areas. Find them in France, find them in Germany. It's going to be an ongoing problem for generations still. Same thing applies in the Eastern Theater. You still find unexploded munitions on a lot of the islands. The Philippines still has a heck of a lot of them. And even later, like Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos, for example, there's lots and lots of landmines still in Cambodia. They actually have professional cleanup crews. That's all they do is go out and find and eliminate these things. Horrible stuff. But it's not always just some of the war areas. We actually had that problem here where I live. Munitions train derailed back, I want to say it was the 50s. Could be a little off there. One of my mom's cousins remembered this well and has repeated the story many times. But yeah, munition train derailed. A lot of munitions went off and threw some of the ones that hadn't gone off over a wide area of the town, as well as a train car full of bubble gum, which is the main thing my mom's cousin remembered and told us about, was how he and his friend would go around town picking up all the bubble gum. But as recently as maybe 2 decades ago, they were still finding grenades and stuff around town, unexploded. But if that's that bad in a place like this. Imagine in a place like France or Germany, where a war was going on for years, and they were deliberately, like landmine, hiding this stuff. Boggles the mind. Terrible stuff.
The wealthy class in Victorian England loved making themselves as white as possible, so they would eat and bathe in arsenic to lighten their complexion. The first version of the internet, called ARPANET, began as a connection between 2 computers in California in 1969. It eventually branched out to multiple computers for research purposes and information sharing, forming an intercommunication network, shortened to Internetwork, and shortened more to the internet. Nowadays, you can watch someone press their feet into a webcam halfway across the world for $3.99.
That was
an hour,
random.
Or so I've heard. China was actually the first country to use paper money all the way back in the 7th century because coins were just too dang heavy for merchants to lug around all the time. Roman gladiator blood was once used as a cure for epilepsy.
Didn't know that.
Using forks to eat food used to be considered offensive to God since he gave you hands to eat with.
That is accurate.
In the 1856 Belgian general election, Catholics won the Chamber of Representatives 63-45 against the Liberal Party. The Secretary of the Navy during the United States Civil War was Gideon Welles. He had 8 children. The first modern Olympic Games were held in Athens, Greece in 1896. The first silver medalist, gold medals didn't exist yet, was American James B. Connolly in the triple jump. Winston Churchill reportedly smoked up to 15 cigars a day.
Way too much.
George Price of the Canadian Army was the last casualty of World War I.
I don't think that's true. I think there was one more after that.
On November 11th, 1918, he was hit in the chest by a sniper at 10:58 a.m. in Mons, Belgium, 2 minutes before the war officially ended.
I think there was one other guy that was killed a little bit after this. I could be wrong.
Sorry about that. The first emperor of Japan was legendary Emperor Jimmu, a claimed descendant of the sun god Amaterasu, though there is no evidence that he actually existed.
Or for that matter, that the sun god existed.
Liston was a British surgeon in the 1800s, famous for his swift surgeries. At a time where the best
Yeah, I've heard of this guy. He did as much damage to people watching as he did to his patients sometimes.
anesthetics were a shot of whiskey and a stick to bite on, speed was critical to minimize pain. During his most famous surgery, Liston set a leg amputation 80% record in just 2.5 minutes flat, severing the fingers of his assistant and accidentally stabbing a nearby spectator. All 3 men died. Basketball.
Not bad, trying to go in to save one guy and end up killing 3. Okay, that is bad.
Ball was invented in 1891 by Canadian-American physician James Naismith. You put ball
Good for
in
you.
basket. Fun.
Brilliant.
During World War II, American
I actually like basketball. It's one of my favorite sports to play. I also like volleyball and soccer. Never was much of a football fan personally, and I was in Little League briefly. My record was not good. We'll just leave it at that. Baseball's definitely not my thing because I suck at it. At least I could actually play football decently well. Baseball, I'm an idiot.
It's called hamburgers, Liberty steaks, and sauerkraut, Liberty cabbage.
That's not unusual. That happens a lot of times when countries go to war, especially United States. We have this habit of renaming things, and it's not just food, and it's not just limited to the Germans in World War I, World War II. You'd also see things like this even more recently with the war in Iraq, when France wouldn't support us. We seriously talked about changing the name of French fries. The Liberty fries. But yeah, sauerkraut was Liberty cabbage. Street names around the country were changed from German names to things like Liberty Street. And you had things like Liberty Gardens, where you were growing food to help support the war effort and to reduce the need for rationing. Yeah, interesting stuff.
The weather in Phoenix, Arizona in the US on April 20th, 1969 at around 5 p.m. was 90 degrees Fahrenheit with winds east-southeast at 8 miles per hour. The Lebanese city of Tyre was founded in 27 BC. The first
Tyre is a pretty major city in history, one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities. It was, I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe it was a major seat of power for the Phoenicians at one point in its history. It becomes famous later on with Alexander the Great conquering Tyre. It's an island at that time, but Alexander the Great, that his biggest strength was his army, solves his problem sieging this island by building 2 ramps out of stone so that he could march his troops over to the island. And those ramps, or walkways, I guess you'd call them, are still there to this day. You can still see remnants of them. But more importantly, they interrupted the normal flow of the channel, which caused sediment to build up there. So now you have an isthmus, a land bridge connecting the island to land. Thanks to Alexander.
The first instance of income tax in the U.S. started in 1861 to raise funds for the Civil War.
That is accurate. It was temporary. It would be revisited for World War I, Wilson, and that's when we kind of kept it.
Anyone making over $800, or the equivalent of $28,000 today, was taxed a flat rate of 3%. Marie Antoinette's music teacher was a German opera composer by the name of Christoph Willibald Gluck.
The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time came out in November of 1998, and I'm still playing it.
All right. That's the only Legend of Zelda game I've ever played.
No witches were actually burned alive during the Salem witch trials. Instead,
That's true.
They were just
They were hung. Well, one guy who hadn't confessed was crushed to death by having a plank placed over him and heavy stones placed upon it to try to force a confession. He refused, so they just kept adding stones until he died from suffocation. But yeah, in America, we hung witches typically. Burning witches was a much more limited thing in Europe.
It's hanged, which is quicker and doesn't smell as bad.
Right.
In 1644, eating pie was banned in England. Meat pies, fruit pies, your wife's pie, all of them.
That's not good. Pies are great. Well, unless you're talking about Mrs. Lovett pies in England, that I can see banning.
Prince Louis Rwagasore of Burundi is regarded as a national hero. He
Okay.
led a political resistance against Belgium and demanded independence from the colonizers. He was
Okay.
elected second prime minister of Burundi in 1961 and served his country for 2 weeks before he was assassinated by political opponents. Burundi was granted independence from Belgium a year later.
Yeah, in Belgium, if you're not familiar with King Leopold and the Belgian Congo, talk about your atrocities. Horrible stuff happened there. I don't want to get into the details because I don't want to make this video 2 hours long, but King Leopold does take control of the Congo, parts of it. He's mainly interested in rubber plantations. He just totally abuses the people there. In fact, it gets bad enough that the Belgian government takes it away from him because it had been his personal playground. Later, it becomes administered by this Belgian state. I'm kind of glad that the Congo got its independence. Too bad about what happened to this guy, though.
The Kingdom of Karagwe in modern-day Tanzania was disestablished in 1963.
Okay.
Adolf Hitler helped design the Volkswagen Beetle.
He did.
A
Favorite car of serial killers in the early years. Coincidence? Think not.
carrier pigeon named Commando successfully carried out over
Right.
90 missions during World War II.
Isn't he in the Smithsonian now?
He even got a medal. The fifth leader of the Soviet Union was Leonid Brezhnev, and the guy
Yeah,
had eyebrows for days.
he did. I remember him well. Growing up, whenever he came on the news, he creeped me out because of those eyebrows. That was just, I never had seen or since then really seen eyebrows like that. Yeah.
The 27th state added to the US was Florida.
Okay.
Despite humans being around for over 200,000 years, written history is only 6,000 years old. So
As far as we know, we can't know that for sure. There could be sites that are undiscovered. Some things that we take as random cave paintings may have actually had communication value. But more to the point, let's consider the possibility that we may have had people writing on perishable materials, like paper, although I doubt that would have existed here. But there are examples, for example, up by Lake Ladoga in Russia, around where Novgorod is, they have found writing on bark that dates back to, I believe, around 800 AD. Might be older, I don't remember for sure. But if we're talking about thousands of years BC, that bark's not going to be there anymore. If it is, any writing probably going to faded. So writing on soft material. Some natives, for example, in America, Native Americans used hide. Well, hide doesn't survive for thousands of years typically. Even when it does, you're probably not going to be able to recognize any writing on it. So my point here is it depends to some degree on what we might have been writing on and whether that's something that would survive this long, as well as our ability to recognize it as writing. Another good example I can think of is in the Andes, in the Incan Empire. They communicated by knot tied in cords. Well, those aren't going to survive for thousands of years, very likely. Even if they did, would we necessarily recognize them as a writing system? Probably not. So take that with a grain of salt.
who knows what they did? Probably hucked rocks at each other. The Industrial Revolution in the US began in 1760.
Okay.
All the way until 1840.
Okay.
Popular game Jenga experienced a lull of sales in 2001 because Jenga towers
Right.
weren't the only ones to fall that year.
Not good.
Silk was first used in clothing back in China in 3630 BC. Silky smooth. During
Yep.
the stock market crash of 1929, the Dow Jones Index, which tracks 30 of the biggest US companies, fell 89% when it bottomed out in the summer of 1932.
Pretty
It
bad.
took 22 years to get back to pre-crash heights. That's why I invest responsibly. all on red. Well, that was a lot
I
of
like the
useless
way he
information.
thinks.
Click here to learn something else.
That said, great video. If you like what Chat History does, I do have a link to original content down in the description. Please consider supporting our original content creators. We want them to keep doing this. With that said, thank you for watching my video. If you like what you see, consider returning for the next one. Till then, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.